Welcome to You Can Trust Yourself with Meg and Maggie. Nothing feels as good as listening to your own voice, and each week we have conversations to help you do just that. Get comfy, grab your favorite fun drink, and let's dive into this week's episode.
Hi, everybody. I almost said good morning because we are recording bright and early this morning, which is not our typical situation. So maybe you'll like this energy. You may have more zen and quiet Meg and Maggie in some ways. But if you're listening to this in the morning as well, good morning. We are getting on here today to talk about a topic that is, again, kind of something that we find happening in present times, but more so in the past too. So we always like to bring you into our stories and experiences to kind of bring more light to a certain topic. But today we're going to be talking about how when we feel joy or happiness, sometimes our brains, or my brain at least, I should really just speak for myself, my brain likes to immediately bring me to like worst case scenario. Like my brain just wants to keep me prepared. And that is something that I'm actively working on, letting my brain and body relax into the state of feeling happy and joy when I feel it. So we're excited to talk about that. I promise we'll give you more context of what that means as we get going, but I hope you all are well this morning. Hi, Maggie. Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, wow. I sound weird.
I don't think we've ever recorded this early.
Probably not.
Mm-mm.
If we have, it's been a long time, like many, many episodes ago.
Mm-hmm. At least many.
Yeah.
It is something that I feel like we just, I don't know, we just never record in the morning, but sometimes I like it. So let's see how this episode goes. But Maggie, going along with the theme that we are discussing today, I know I brought this idea to you through a voice memo, which so many of our ideas come through a voice memo note in the text messages app. So for this topic, when I sent you the voice memo of like, hey, episode idea, what were some of your thoughts around this topic for you specifically?
So when you sent me the message, I actually didn't listen to it as a voice memo. Apple has this new thing where it'll transcribe it for you. And so I just read it and I could hear you talking, even though I wasn't actually listening to it. But you were talking about how last weekend you were going to the mall and like you had a day to yourself and you were genuinely really excited about this day. And then all of a sudden, like you were just saying, your brain went to worst case scenario, right? And you had all of this joy and excitement and like this wonderful day ahead of you, free time, Meg time, like to do whatever you wanted. And then all of a sudden your brain hijacked your day. It hijacked your day. And when I was reading it, I was like, I love this topic because that specific instance doesn't happen to me very often, but I have a similar type of hijacking occur in like other areas of life in relation to joy. And so I was really excited about this because I think that most people will be able to relate in one way or another. And I'm excited to talk about how we coach ourselves through these types of scenarios
Mm-hmm.
because we can choose to just let it be and live our day that way, or we can choose to change it. And we
Yes.
typically choose to change it. And I'm excited to talk about that.
I am too. And I love the words like hijacking because it feels very appropriate and honest for what that experience was. And so to provide a little more context, I'm actually going to give you guys like what that experience was like for me because it was very recent. It was was it last weekend, Maggie? 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago? Because you were in Florida, so it would have been last weekend. Okay, let me give you guys the story so you can understand the context more of how we came up with this episode idea and why we're excited to share it with you. So with my schedule and the way that like therapy goes and podcasts and other work things that I'm doing, blah, 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 it's kind of rare that I have like a totally free day because I have such a weird schedule. Like that's the balance of like virtual is like you have this beautiful privilege of like being able to work from home or take calls at home or see clients at home, whatever. And then you also have this thing where it's like you're kind of always available and you got to take calls all the time because you don't physically leave an office, and it's a weird balance that I'm trying to find, blah, blah, blah. So I say all this to say that it's kind of rare that I have a completely free day. Like there's usually something, oh, I got to call it 3, so I got to kind of be local, blah, blah, blah. So last Saturday I had a totally free day. Like, oh my gosh, nothing is on my calendar. My whole fam, nobody's around. It's just me. I have a day to myself. And there is one place around here, it's a mall where I am in Northern Virginia, that is fantastic. I just have a great experience there. It's bright, it's sunny, it's fun. I just love going to that mall when I can. And the thing is, nobody else in my family likes to go to it. My husband doesn't want to go to it. My family doesn't really want to go to it. So it's like, it's always just a me thing that I go and do. I don't even typically buy a lot, but I get lunch for myself there. And it's just like a day for me. And I love those days. So I noticed this last Saturday, I'm like geeking out with excitement, like, it's a me day. Here we go. I'm going to have lunch with myself and sit in this cafe, and I'm going to get coffee, and I'm going to window shop, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of spending money that whatever I find for fun, I can purchase, right? And so I'm thrilled about this day. So I get in the car to go on my day after getting all like wearing what I wanted to wear and just really making a moment out of it. I get in the car and my brain starts doing this thing, which it does so often. And I've been so used to it doing it for so many years, where it starts picturing worst case scenario. And I'm going to, I want to say like a trigger warning, if that's the right thing to say, because it can be, some of the thoughts I'm going to share with you are a little more like, intense in nature, but I want to bring you into my mind of what it can really look like for me. So, if that's too much for you, or violence or anything like that freaks you out with thoughts, like just feel free to skip probably the next 30 seconds of the podcast episode. So I get in the car getting ready to go, and I start envisioning like, oh my gosh, what if there's a shooting at the mall? Or what if this terrible act occurs? I'm right outside of Washington, D.C. What if an attack happens, or this or that? I start noticing my brain going into this very dark place from this very light place. And I've sat with myself long enough and also paid for enough therapy to know that my baseline a lot of times is more of an anxious, hypervigilant place. It just, for many different reasons, many factors, call it nature, call it nurture, that's just where I tend to go. So with that being said, like Maggie said, I love the words that you used, Maggie. I have had to learn to coach myself through that. And for many years, the reason I'm excited about this episode is that for so many years, when you use the word hijacking, Maggie, I truly felt like that was just, I'm at the mercy of my mind and that's it. So I'm going to go, and now I'm just going to be scared all day long. And I spent so many days in that really hypervigilant place. And so I want to come back to the story in a few minutes so we can kind of chat about it. But I had to, in that moment, coach myself through what my choices were for that day, because my joy was about to be robbed or hijacked by my conditioning. That's what I want to make really clear. My conditioning, my anxious baseline conditioning, wants to keep me, quote unquote, safe. So it does this thing where it gives me all the worst, horrible scenarios. But I have learned, and we're going to talk about this, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it, Maggie. We have the choice to trust ourselves in those moments to help. Doesn't mean it's going to go away, right? Those thoughts are still going to come up for me. But I have a choice to help myself through them instead of feeling like, okay, I'm at the mercy of you thoughts. You tell me where we're going today.
Yes. Oh, I'm so happy we're talking about this because this has changed my entire life. Like realizing that the thoughts that are going on in my brain aren't necessarily me has changed my entire life, because up until you realize that, anything that goes on inside of your head, whether you hear your actual voice, you don't, however it occurs for you, if we believe that that is the truth and that is just what it is, then I love how you said, like, you're going to live at the mercy of that. Like, you don't get to live the life that you want to live because you're going to live at the mercy of what your conditioned brain is telling you. And the brain is, it has parts, right? It has parts. I like to look at it. You explain this when I talk about it, well, many times, like of like parts therapy, right? Where you're separating parts of yourself from one another. And I really visualize it that way of like, okay, this part of my brain that is telling me these wild things, right? To keep me safe, that is part of me, and it's just one part. I have this whole other part that I get to influence, and we get to have a conversation, right? We get to go back and forth, and we get to say, okay, yeah, I hear you. Thank you for those ideas, but actually, we're not going to believe those today. So we're going to move on now. And that changed my whole life because it brought me to the place of being able to realize that I get to have some sort of control over how I experience life. And I don't have to just live at the mercy of not only other people and things going on around me, but my own self.
I'm happy we recorded first thing in the morning because I feel the tears welling up in my eyes. And I don't know if it's because I'm not fully awake yet, but what you just shared is like bringing me, I think, to like the core of the work that I believe in and the work that I do. And that we do together on the podcast too. I know we don't always focus on the mental health piece as much, but it always seeps in there, right? Because it's
Yeah,
a
of
huge
course.
part of our lives. But you saying that it brought some tears to my eyes because that power that you found of it changing your life is the entire reason I do what I do. Because for me, when I stepped away from the field of mental health and like took some time to myself, that was the onset, or I should say, probably wasn't the onset of OCD for me, but it was the exacerbation of it. Of you can't ignore this anymore, because through the work I've done now, OCD has been present in my life for many years, but it wasn't. How do we say this? It wasn't big enough that I didn't have to deal with it fully yet, if that makes sense. So it intensified during some time for me, and it's the reason that for me, it made me feel like it took over my life. Like to give you a lighter visual of it, during that time, I remember, and I have journal entries of it, when I was going through like the bouts of learning what intrusive thoughts were, what OCD style thoughts were showing up for me as the compulsions I was doing, like when I was really in the throes of it before I knew enough. I remember journaling and writing, like, I feel like anxiety has come in. I think I've shared this on the podcast before, taped me up and thrown me in the trunk of the car. And anxiety was driving the car. Like that's truly how it felt in seasons, was that I was at I was like at, again, trigger warning words, violent words. I felt like I was at gunpoint with anxiety. Like I felt like anxiety had a gun to my head and I was at the mercy of whatever my anxiety told me was going on or whatever those intrusive thoughts were telling me. And they scared me to my core. So for anybody who has lived in that state or is living in that state, believe me when I tell you that I'm sure it's not the exact same, but I can empathize to the 100 millionth degree of feeling like you are at war with your mind or that you are held captive by your mind. I knew we were using a lot of like hijacking war, like we're using a lot of that terminology today, but I felt like I was held hostage and captive by my mind, and that anxious part of me, which I know this language now, being, a therapist in training and getting help for myself and now being able to help others, that anxious part of me became the center of attention because it was not treated, right? It did not have treatment or help in the mental health setting that I needed. Therefore, it was running rampantly out of control, and I needed help to get through that. And so, what you're describing, Maggie, and I'm curious if you can tell us more because what you just shared sounds like it's extremely impactful, that it changed your life, right? Of the way that you were thinking. How did you kind of realize, like, okay, I'm in this place where my thoughts are blank, whatever you want to share, and I realize I need to make a shift in my life with them?
Ooh, how did I realize that? I'm not 100% sure when it started, truthfully. I feel like I've always had somewhat of a sense of understanding of it, but I wasn't always great at it, if that makes sense. Like I always had some sort of understanding of the fact that like I had the power to change what was going on, but I didn't always know what I was doing to do it. Right. So I think as an athlete, you learn that you have to be in control of the way that you're thinking about situations because your mind is going to impact your performance. And so I think that was like where the awareness started, but I didn't always know what I was doing to make changes or like how to do it. It would just happen sometimes, right? And so when I started my business, actually, my online fitness coaching business, I started to really get into like personal development books and podcasts and things like that. And that's when I started to learn more about this. And I started to learn more about the fact that like you have the power to change what's going on. And I started with simple things like affirmations in the 5-minute journal, and then it got a lot more in depth with different things that I was learning because I'm really fascinated by this type of things. So I feel like I've done a lot of learning about it. But for me, I think that some of the simplest tools that I used. I'm excited. Before we were recording this morning, I was so excited to talk about our toolbox again because I feel like we haven't talked about a toolbox in a really long time. This is like perfect toolbox episode. But um it's one of those things that like as you build up your toolbox around it, it kind of just progresses over time. And then there becomes situations where you don't have to consciously think about the switch anymore. The switch just happens. And then you can focus on new situations that you have to consciously think about switching, right? So for me, I experience it more in like, for example, the last couple of days, not today, but the last couple of days, like previous to that, I have been waking up just like very grumpy. And I go through phases of this where I just wake up in the morning and I am just like, I'm not like angry, I'm just grumpy. And I don't love to feel that way. And so for me, similarly to how you were explaining, like you're so excited about going to the mall and then anxiety hijacks your brain, right? When I wake up that way, I know that my brain has been hijacked. Like that's not truly me. Like that's not truly how I want to feel, even if it is how I'm feeling in that moment. And so that's where I need to like dive into the toolbox and be like, okay, I'm grumpy this morning. That's how I'm feeling right now. That's not how I want to feel for the rest of the day. So what am I going to do to change my state of being?
I love that you've found power in one, the visual of a toolbox. And I want to like talk about that a little bit because sometimes I feel and I felt extremely, I still feel this way and I felt it even more intensified in the past. Sometimes I feel, and I don't know if you've ever related to this, but like sometimes the traditional like toolbox style things fell very flat for me when I was in the very dark seasons
Mhm.
of a life. Do you relate to that? Like, did you ever feel like some of the like tools were like, you're like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yes, I feel that way often, especially with like affirmations and meditation are big ones for me that if I'm not doing them consistently, they are useless in a moment of
Mm,
need. Like
mm,
those things do not work. Like, oh, I wake up grumpy. Let me just like write some affirmations. Like that is not working in that moment. Like those are preventative
mm-hmm.
tools. Those are not tools to be used in a moment of need.
Yeah.
And I do feel that like through different seasons of life, different things work better than others. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll hear, oh, try this, and you're like, okay, and then you're like, well, that did absolutely nothing.
Yes. Yes. And that it can be something that I'm just going to speak super candidly. And I actually, it's kind of influencing me today. So there is a therapist named Allegra Castens who I love. We can share her like handle in the bio on Instagram, but she is someone who I absolutely adore following. She talks all about OCD, has experience with it herself, and now helps others through it. And so she's just like a need follow person for me. Um, and I actually saw a post of hers this morning saying that sometimes when we talk about like lifestyle tools, they can fall short of almost insulting a diagnosis. So for me, I'm going to go a step further. Maggie's talking more generally. For me, the throes that I was in with OCD, everybody has an idea for you. And this is, here we go, back to the mission of our podcast. Everybody has opinions for you, right? So if you go on TikTok or you go on Instagram and you say, I'm feeling really anxious, I've literally seen videos like this regularly where people are like, I'm so anxious or I'm so depressed or I'm so blank, any insert emotional decision. If you go in the comment section, there are people, which in some ways is a really beautiful thing. People are trying to give you what they want to share. However, sometimes it can fall really short for what you truly need. So a lot of people will go in the comments and say, make sure you're walking, make sure you're drinking water, make sure you find Jesus in your life, make sure you're journaling, smelling lavender, whatever it may be, right? None of these quote unquote tools or things are necessarily bad. Nobody's telling you like something terrible necessarily. However, if that's not what you need, it can be terrible because you're going to walk your little face off, right? That's what happened to me a lot with anxiety. I was like, I'm trying the things. I'm smelling the lavender. I still feel like I'm going to die. Like I still feel horrible. And it's because I needed true specialized care and medication. So the lavender, you could have came in and injected my arm with lavender intravenously. Okay. That was not going to touch the shit that I was experiencing. Right. And so these tools that we talk about that are, I notice now in a more state where I still take my medication and I still seek my own help, working out has become essential. I was saying this to my husband last night. I said, the rumors are true. Exercise makes you feel good. I said, I'm here to report that consistently exercising lately, I'm here to report that unfortunately, everyone is right. Maggie was right. Okay. And I'm really upset about it because now I got to keep up with it and still figure out how to do it consistently. But I'm here to tell you the rumors are true. Exercise makes you feel better when you do it consistently. Okay. However, in the throes of those seasons, would it have helped? Probably, right? Would it have necessarily truly helped? I don't think so for me. I needed medication intervention and I needed really specialized psychotherapy to help with exposure therapy for what I needed, right? So as we talk about tools and different things, what I cannot drill home enough is that so many people have such well-meaning advice and beautiful thoughts, right? We find that even on our own page, people sharing what's worked for them, what hasn't. It's a beautiful thing for people to share. And the ability to trust yourself and know that, okay, I need to look inward, which we know is a practice and we know that takes time. I have to find out what works for me. And that's something that I'm excited to get into now in this episode, Maggie, is like the actual on the ground, what the coaching looks like in our brains, right? So what does that look like for us so that then our listeners or our trustees can go and say, okay, maybe I'll try that. Didn't work for me. I got to find something else, or I got to try something for me. I think that that is really, really valuable. So let's at least share ours, if that's okay with you, of how we kind of coach ourselves through those moments where our brain is being hijacked by blank.
Yeah, I would love for you to go first. So let's go back to the mall. Okay, so you're driving, right?
Yep.
You are driving there. First, you had all these feelings of excitement. Now you are feeling anxious, worried, concerned, right? Because of all of these seemingly wild, not too wild, but seemingly wild thoughts are popping into your brain. So what did you do?
Sure. So I notice that mine tends to work in very polarized ways. So I notice that this thought pattern comes up most often when I'm in a overly joyed state, which doesn't happen too often for me. I try and be like baseline neutral or baseline like kind of happy. Like I try and make that my everyday. However, like overly joyed, like jacked up on excitement vibes is not me often, maybe a few times a month if I'm lucky, whatever. So I notice it when I'm in those like very, very like joyful, excited moments. My brain's like, oh, no, bitch. We're not going to that place because you're about to keep us in a place that is not safe. Our brain doesn't want to be there, right? That's that part of me, that anxious part of me. So in the car.
Sorry to interrupt. I do have a question though. Do you feel like part of it, not that your brain is thinking this, but like as like a therapist in training, do you feel like part of it is that your brain knows it's not sustainable?
That's a really great point. I haven't thought about that, but probably because it's like this homeostasis. Like I work so hard, and I know we've talked about this like off air, that we work so hard to maintain more of like a homeostasis, like a balanced state. That's a great point. I've never thought of it that way, of like my brain may be like, hey, don't think that this is going to be your baseline. Mm-hmm. Don't think that this is the goal.
Yeah.
I wonder
too. Really good question. I've had that thought. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
And I'm excited to hear about that because I know that's been a little more of your experience. So I'm excited to get there. But okay, back to the question. In the car, driving to the place, I noticed those thoughts coming in of like being very fearful and nervous all of a sudden and blah, blah. And I have to sometimes talk out loud to myself. It really, really helps me to get myself. It's like I need to get out of my head and back into my body and back into like conscious life. So for me, that means I talk to myself a lot. And it is what it is. I like it about myself. Some other person, like therapist, may listen to that and be like, that's a red flag. And maybe it is, right? But I'm here for it. So I'm going to keep this red flag because it helps me, everybody. Okay. So I'm in the car, I'm driving to the mall, and I have to actively say out loud, Meg, I hear those thoughts. Those are possibilities, right? We live in a scary world a lot of times. Those are real things that can occur and have occurred to many, many people. And you love going to the mall. You don't necessarily want to stop going to the mall. Therefore, this is literally exactly what I'll say to myself. You have to trust that if, God forbid, something horrendous is happening, you're going to do your best to help yourself through those moments. And it's my way of bringing my mind and body back to, I see you, anxiety, but you can't drive the car anymore. And it's kind of a beautiful metaphor, the fact that I was driving in the car of, I have let you drive the car for so much of my life. You can still be here with me. I am very aware. This is literally what I'll say to myself. And I walk my clients through this education too of, I can't tell you how many times clients will say like, I'll say, what's your goal for anxiety? Like, give me a number. And be like, I just want God. And we have to have this conversation of like, a baseline of anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing, right? To be aware of things happening. So how I will say to myself and how a lot of clients will now phrase it is they'll actually pretend that anxiety's in the back seat, like a younger little brother or sister or whoever, little creature, whatever they come up with. And it's a visual exercise that you can do. So if you want some free, strategy right now, this is something that I've practiced of like talking to myself out loud. Anxiety, I hear you, but you got to sit in the back seat. I know that this can happen. I know that all of these horrific things can happen today. And I know that I still really want to go. So we're going to go and you can come along with me because you're here to keep me safe, right? Hold my hand. Let's go into the mall. But Meg, as a whole person, is going to conduct this day and you're going to be here with me. And I know this sounds weird, but I find myself, it brings me to a place, as odd as this is, it's extremely healing for me to even talk to the anxiety of like, come on, we can go get some lunch together. I'll get you something off the kids menu. Like I know that sounds silly, but when I get in very fearful places, when I talk to parts of myself as if they are children or younger, scared parts of me, it helps. I've even done this. We're already here, so I'm just going to bring you into all my weird thoughts. I've done this. I am very, very scared of like paranormal ghosty vibe things. Like
I
things
didn't
like
know
that
that
just
about you.
I get very scared. Okay. I'll sometimes like mess around and be like, yeah, I can watch the movie. Da, da, da. I'm like up shaking for the next. Like I'm not good with it. So I have even noticed this part of me of saying like, okay, if there are ghosts or spirits, whatever, you could be around, but you can't scare me. Go have a snack in the kitchen. You can hang out here, whatever. You're allowed, whatever. But you can't scare me. That's the one rule. And I feel like I talk to anxiety about myself now in the similar way of like, you can be here with me. All right, come have a snack with me. Let's hang out. You can come in the back seat of the car, but you can't take over, right? You're not the center of attention. You are a part of me. And I'm really letting you into that to know that that's truly how I talk myself through it and reframing it into this scared childlike part of me has been very, very critical in my ability to work through anxiety, in addition to my medication and own therapy and all the other things. But that visual and that coaching has been life-changing for me.
Well, let's just put it on repeat because I literally do the same thing. I Okay, so I want to talk about two different scenarios. One is what I do like when I'm grumpy in the morning, that type of thing. But first, I want to go off of what you were saying, which is more of this fear, right? Because when that happens to me, I do the same thing where I separate it out. right? And I have to have a conversation with that part of me. So, for example, this past weekend, I went to Florida for one of my friend's bachelorette parties and we flew there. And there's been a lot of news lately about airplanes crashing. And so that was like you're saying, like very real fear, right? Like there is an actual possibility all the time, but now it's like I'm more aware of it, right? Because we're seeing it in the news that this airplane could crash. Like that's a real fear. And so I'm sitting in the seat and, right before takeoff, I start to feel anxiety and I start to, my heart rate starts to pick up, the thoughts start to spiral. And in that moment, I know, okay, I have a choice right now, right? I can let this take over or I can decide to do something about it. And so I decided to coach myself through it very similarly to what you just explained, where I don't always look at it as a child. I information really helps me. And so sometimes it's more of like an adult, if that makes sense. But the separation piece is still exactly the same, where I am looking at, okay, I'm having really anxious thoughts about the fact that, like, what if I'm unsafe? What if this airplane crashes? Like, what if we don't make it off the ground? What if we make it off the ground and then it just explodes? Like, what, like all of these different fears. And so I'm taking those thoughts and I'm doing what you said in the beginning where I'm saying, thank you for trying to keep me safe, right? Hi brain, I hear you. I know that these possibilities are real. Like this is actually real. I'm not trying to gaslight you, right? Like we are not saying that this is not true, okay? This is a very real fear and I appreciate these thoughts for trying to keep me safe. And I love how you said like I love going to the mall and I don't want to stop doing that because what I could choose to do is never fly, right? If I'm afraid of an airplane crashing, I could choose to never fly. But I wanted to go to Florida for my friend's bachelorette. So I chose to get on the airplane. And so I am saying, okay, I understand that these fears are real and I am still choosing to do this thing. So we have to make this work together. We have to make this work. We can't be overly afraid of something that I'm choosing to do. And so, I'm separating those thoughts, I'm thanking them, and I'm saying, this is a very real fear. And I love how you also said, like, I'm going to do the best that I can if, God forbid, a terrible situation happens. Right. And that's literally the thought process is like, there's a very, very high chance that nothing bad is going to happen. And if something bad happens, I know that I will do the best that I can to help myself, right? And like I'm capable of doing the best that I can. That's all that I can offer, right? I can't offer anything else. I can't offer any solutions. I can't offer to be safe. All I can offer is that I'm going to do the best that I can in any situation. And that really helps settle it. But I also want to be clear that my goal is not to not have anxiety. Like I love how you said that when you're having the conversations with your clients is that it's easy to get in that situation and say, okay, my goal is to make this go away completely. That's not my goal. My goal is not to make it go away completely. My goal is to subside it slightly and get to more of a neutral place, right? Just more neutral, slightly more neutral from where I am right now. That's the only goal. It's not to feel positive. It's not to make it completely gone. It's just to feel slightly more neutral than where I currently am. And that really helps me because when you set, at least for me, like I would set this overwhelming goal to be like, I'm feeling afraid. So now I need to not be afraid and I need to feel confident, right? Or I'm feeling sad. Now I need to not feel sad and now I need to feel happy. And when you put that pressure on yourself to completely flip it, it makes it daunting and useless because first of all, it's not even possible. Second of all, like that's such a huge hill to climb that you will not ever feel like you made any progress, right? So for me, it's just this slight improvement, slightly more neutral is the goal.
Mm,
And as soon as I can get to this slightly more neutral, then it's easier to then again be like, okay, slightly more neutral, slightly more
mm,
neutral, slightly more neutral. And before I know
mm.
it, I feel a lot better.
That is simple yet sustainable, which is like your, like everything in a lot of ways of what we talk about and what you share in particular of like, it's a simple goal, right? To feel slightly more neutral and it's more sustainable than the hard switch up, right? And what I want to also mention, along with what you just said, is that what can happen is that, because it happened to me, and I know it happens to many others, but it's a very rarely talked about thing. It's like a very secular part of mental health, is that what can happen is that if we let that fear and that anxious part of us take over for a long time, it can lead to a very, very small life. And it can lead to a very small life in the sense of not flying, maybe not leaving your house, maybe being scared to go into certain places. And I know this because it happened to me. And the craziest part, and the reason why now I'm more like very, I hold both, because I'm like, God, OCD, like you've really really took a number on me. And then at the same time, I'm like, you've made me so much more human, right? Like the fact that I've experienced seasons of going to the grocery store was not happening. I had fear. It makes me kind of giggle, but kind of like, okay, I don't know about these videos. I've seen videos where it's like, unfortunately, my body doesn't know the difference between being in the grocery store and being attacked by a bear.
Yes.
That was me. That was me. I mean, my mom can tell you I wasn't married at the time, and I wasn't with my partner yet. So it was really my mom and I in this season, because I moved home to live with her and blah, blah, blah. And so many seasons of driving to the grocery store and being like, I can do it, Mom. I'm going to go in. Like, I can do it. And making it to the first aisle and being like, I'll see you, bitch. You know, like, I'll see you. And she'd be like, we just drove an hour to get here. You're leaving? And I'm like, yep, I got to go to the car. And that's an episode for another day, because that's a very big deep dive. But if you all are curious about that, I'm even happy, Maggie, if you want to come on for it, you can. But I'm also happy to post like a mini episode of walking you through some of those more panic specific type anxiety things, like more panic attack style. And I'm happy to give some insight on that. If any of you are wanting it, please DM us on social media or leave reviews here on the podcast so that I know that you want to hear more about that. But that was a whole other season for another time. But I share that to say that when we let the fear take over, like Maggie said, it can very quickly turn into not going on those trips to Florida, right? It can very quickly and I love what you said about like, you're not trying to light yourself, because before I knew more and found like more of what works for me with my anxiety, because everybody responds differently to different techniques. And that's why it's really important that different techniques and theories and tools are available, because everybody responds differently. But for me, the ones that were more like thought replacement, which is more like CBT style theory, I didn't love those as much, because for me, it was kind of like pulling apart a fear and being like, it's most likely not going to happen. It just felt too, what's the word? It felt to me like I was putting more space between me and the anxiety. And what worked for me was bringing the anxiety closer into me, giving it a hug, being with it more. Whereas for other people, that style of like thought replacement and more CBT style skills, it might do wonders for them, right? And this is why you can trust yourself. You got to do what works for you. But for me, the bringing it in and like literally picturing myself hugging that small childlike anxiety piece of me has been a game changer. And one other thing I'm going to add, Maggie, to what you were saying is that it is a beautiful thing to say, I'm going to feel slightly more neutral. And for me, there was a season of, I need to feel slightly more uncomfortable. I actually had to learn during that season, I couldn't go from where I was at to feeling better. I actually, as weird as this sounds, and again, this is my own personal experience with my own therapist, and that one size not fits all. This doesn't mean it's going to work for you. I actually had to get to a place where I had to expose myself through very meticulous exposure therapy of how uncomfortable can I get? How freaking uncomfortable can I get? So it was more of I had to increase my tolerance to discomfort. Right. And so for me, that looked, again, I can do a whole other episode on this, but for me, that meant sitting with the freaking horrendous physical symptoms and the horrendous thoughts and intrusive thoughts, and bringing them and letting them breathe and live inside of me, and actually resisting the urge, or for me, the compulsion to try and make myself feel better or try and alleviate that. So I remember, I will give one example. And again, it's very specific to me and what I went through, but if you're curious more about, the work that I had to do, I'm happy to give some tools. For me, I had such a big fear of like, the anxiety was so present in my chest, and I would have a lot of panic attacks. My heart, I would feel like, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. Like my heart is going to explode like this. My heart's not going to be able to take this for much longer. So I actually had to sit there and surrender, which took so much time. But I had to actively practice almost like a meditative state, that when I felt the panic coming on, I actually had to get to a place where instead of fighting it, I remember laying in my bed. Again, if this is too specific, I'm so sorry, everybody. But for those of you who get it, I know you'll appreciate this. I had to literally lay on my bed, arms wide, like the song, arms wide open, right? Lay on my bed and say, God, if I'm going to have a heart attack, let's just do it. Let's just do it, anxiety. Bring it on. Bring it on. Let this heart explode. Because this constant being in fear of the heart exploding, at this fucking point, just let it explode out of my chest. And that was the weird part about that, is that that was the exposure I needed for my specific fears, was increasing that discomfort. So if this applies to you at all, I promise there are ways to help yourself, and trained professionals who specialize in this who can really help you. And I'm happy to get on here and give you my therapist in training version / Meg who went through it version, to just give as much guidance as I can in a free way like this. But that can be very personalized and very individual for us all. So I love, Maggie, hearing your side, hearing mine, and then knowing that our listeners are going to find what works for them.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's very important that just as people, we have the opportunity to hear other people's stories, because otherwise we always feel really alone, right? And whether you relate to me, you relate to Meg, you relate to neither of us, I hope it just helps you feel a little bit less alone, because we all go through shit like this, like we all do, right? When I was in high school, I had severe chest pains, like all constantly. And my dad was really sick with heart disease. He had many heart attacks. So like I went through like the whole gauntlet of testing, like 24-hour heart monitor, like stress tests, like whole thing. And they found nothing wrong with me, like physically, right? And it was anxiety. And I didn't have the opportunity to get any help with it until I was a junior in college. So 4 years later was the first time that I ever encountered anyone who had any ideas of how to help me. Like I literally went to a cardiologist and they were like, "You're fine." And I was like, "I promise you I'm not fine. Like I promise you I'm in so much pain." Similarly to you, I was experiencing a lot of panic attacks, and like lots of pain. And I, was going to professionals who were professionals in their field, but were not trained to help me with what I was experiencing, not trained to even find it. And so if you are in that type of situation where, and you were kind of speaking of this too, Meg, like you know if you need help with something, like we have to trust ourselves. And if you haven't found the answer yet, please don't stop looking, because you can listen to podcasts and you can listen to, us tell you how we coach ourselves. But until you find that most impactful layer of help, the coaching, the toolbox is not going to do anything, right? So for you, you're talking about your therapist, your medication. Those were the really big things for you, the exposure therapy that you did with your therapist, right? Those are the really big things where now you can coach yourself through situations because we took care of that level, right? For me, no level of coaching myself was going to help when I'm experiencing that level of anxiety and panic attacks. Like there's no coaching myself through that, right? We're already experiencing a physical manifestation of this mental situation. And so when that is occurring, we have to get to a deeper level solution to the problem, a more impactful solution to the problem. And only once we do that will these toolboxes help. Right. And each of our issues is going to require a different level of support, right? It's going to require a different type of support. And so hopefully, I hope you never experience a situation where you need to find a specialist to help you with this sort of thing. And the toolbox just helps you for the rest of your life. And if that's you, like, I'm so excited for you. That's amazing. And if that's not you, that's okay. And like, we've all been there. And for me, the reason why I'm able to use the toolbox now is because I did all of that work, right? I did all of that work. I found, for me, the initial thing that helped me ease the anxiety was actually acupuncture. And I just came across acupuncture because I was taking um it was like an Eastern medicine class in college, and we learned about a whole bunch of different types of non-Western medicine, right? And we had to do a sort of modality as an assignment, and I just chose acupuncture. And my whole first appointment, I just cried. Like, we didn't even do acupuncture. Like, it was the first time I'd ever talked to anyone about what was going on, and like, in a way, and to someone who actually wanted to listen to what I had to say. And I just cried the entire time. Like, there was no needles in my body. And so I had to go back again to actually do the assignment for my class. And I went every single week for the rest of college. And that was the first thing that ever helped me ease that, like, physical pain, the chest pains, the anxiety. And then from there, I started to learn a lot more about it. And then, did lots of therapy. Like, I've tried like all sorts of different things. And that's why my toolbox works now, because I've built a
Mhm.
toolbox that actually works for me, right? And I didn't
Yeah.
just start like choosing random things and hoping that they worked. Yes, I did kind
Mm.
of happen to fall upon the initial solution, and I think that that can happen too. But if you feel like you're trying lots of things and it's not working, maybe try to look a little deeper, because
Mm.
there's a deeper layer that needs to be addressed.
Mm. I notice myself, Maggie, as you say that. I'm very emotional today. I keep tearing up as you say things. And I love it because it just means I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Like, that's what it means for me. Like, when things bring tears to my eyes in this nature, like, it's my whole heart of like mental health in these parts. And it made me, I noticed two things happening as you said that, of like, it made me angry, which is an interesting one.
Me too.
And I'll tell you why it's interesting. So I felt angry, right, for you and myself and everyone else who has to fight and quote unquote dig deeper for the help, because let's just be really honest, in a lot of ways our healthcare system, but then even more specifically our mental health care system, is not set up to appropriately address what we need yet, right? And so praying to be a part of that fight to help it be better and easier for people to get help to what they need, but it is a fight. And the part that makes me so emotional is that when you are already under attack by your brain, let's say, with whatever mental is going on. For us, our shared experience is more anxiety, but depression, anything else that can be coming up for you, you don't have a ton of fight in you necessarily. You're already so for me, anxiety was at that time in the darkest of dark days, like in the most hard times, anxiety was taking up 95% of my brain. So with that 5 freaking% that I had left, I had to try and find a specialist for it, which I'm just going to say this very candidly, an OCD specialist is very hard to find. What I will say is that if any of this connects to you, there is a team called NoCD, NOCD, who tend to be very well trained OCD specialists, but it's very, very hard to find an OCD specialist. And this is my own qualm with mental health, and I'm just going to say it. But when you go on to find a therapist and they specialize in 100 different things, I'm just going to say it. I was going to like tiptoe around it. It's a red fucking flag. Okay? It is a red flag for clinicians. And this is just me and my schooling and my training. We've been taught that it's a red flag, that there's nothing wrong with being a general therapist who can kind of pop into different things. But when you need a specialist, when you need something very specific, it is a red flag when people will list on their profiles that they specialize in 100 different things. Okay, because to specialize in addiction, postpartum, perinatal, depression, anxiety, OCD, all of those things have their own all those things are enough to specialize in one of them. So to specialize in so many things is a red flag. So I'm just going to say that. But it makes me angry that when we already are in a place struggling with our mental health, to have to go and fight to find it can sometimes feel really hard. And I believe, this is just a belief of mine, I believe that's a lot of the reason why people stay stuck in where they are, because
I
they're just
agree.
in survival mode.
Yeah.
And to have to go out and get that freaking shovel to dig yourself out to find somebody who will help you, and then figure out how to afford it and how to do this and how to make it work with your busy schedule, and it can be a nightmare, right? And so I will tell this story, and it's probably one of the last stories I have around this topic, but it's kind of nice because it ties in with you, Maggie, in the sense that my like OCD hit a tipping point when I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. I just moved there by myself, blah, blah, and it just happened that Maggie's sister and mom were living in Nashville at the time, and they were my godsends at that time, because or else I would have been totally alone in that city. And I put them through a lot because I was really going through a lot. And I remember one night, this is going to make me emotional, Maggie's sister, I hope she'll be okay with me sharing this story. It has not much to do with her, so I think it's okay. But she takes me to the ER because my physical symptoms of anxiety were so perplexed. She sat with me the entire time. She had a little girl that she could have been home with. And she sat with me and stayed with me. And I remember, oh, I'm getting very emotional. I felt so bad. I was like, I'm so sorry that you have to like stay here and sit with me. And she was just so like, it's okay. I'm here with you, like whatever you need. And it was everything I needed during that time. And I remember being sure that something was wrong with me, because there was no way that the physical symptoms I was feeling, the dizziness, the heart pounding, the vision changes, all of these things, which can be connected to anxiety. They're not always, so you should go and see a doctor to make sure. I was like, there's no way that this is anxiety. Like something's wrong with my brain. Like something's wrong with my body. And she sat with me in the ER for countless hours. And I remember I just happened to go to a hospital, Vanderbilt, in Nashville, who happened to be really great, and they were pretty good. And they sent somebody down, I believe, in hindsight, from the psych department to kind of like help me, like talk me through it and blah, blah, blah. And that was really great. But I remember leaving the hospital after being sure that something was wrong with me and getting a prescription for a very low dose, it's basically like a glorified Benadryl. I'm not going to say what the drug was because it doesn't matter, but like it was basically like something to just kind of make you sleepy, like to take you down a notch. And I remember leaving there with my very low dose of glorified Benadryl, and I was like, there was a moment, a very split moment, and I got in Maggie's sister's car, and she went in to get my prescription for me because she was a true angel that day. And I remember getting in the car and having this momentary relief of, oh, nothing's physically wrong with me. All the checks, it all checked out, right? I don't have a brain bleed. I don't have no heart attacks happening. I don't have anything physical. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh my gosh, something mentally is going on with me. And it was this huge aha, life-changing moment for me of like, okay, if it's not physical, wow, I have it happened to be a mental disorder, right? OCD for me. But it was a very real, raw moment of being like, wow. And the anger that I feel, I'll bring it back to what I was trying to connect to with Maggie, is that there's some anger that I feel now being in the field of knowing that I left with my glorified Benadryl and nothing else. There was no follow-up for mental health. There was no even consult for mental health. And at that point, I needed intervention. I needed help. And our system is just not built to be holistic like that and to help mental and physically, unless, and this is the part, I'm just going to say this very candidly, unless you say that something is going on intensely enough that they bring you into the actual like psychiatric unit, or they bring you in for more intense things. But the problem is that there's so many of us who fall in that, hey, not really in the general level, but maybe not in the hospitalized level yet either. There is this whole gap in our mental health system that gets missed. And I've talked about this, and I'm just going to say it here for fun. I may consider one day, like a mental health urgent care, like a place where somebody can help you decipher what's going on, right? And help you get to the right team. Because when you're in that state and in that space, that energy to go and help yourself, I understand why so many people don't. And I'm very grateful that I somehow mustered up the energy too, because now I feel like a very strong advocate for those who do need that. And I hope to give that in some way. But I'm happy I got to share that story about Amy. We love her very, very much.
She is an angel. You are correct. And I have no doubt that you will help so many people with this. And I love that idea, by the way. If you want to talk about a business plan, let me know. But
I got to get licensed fully first, everybody. I'm still in training.
I know. I'm so excited for you. But this was a lot of different stories, a lot of different experiences, a lot of different things, right? We thought we were going to talk about coaching ourselves. We did talk about coaching ourselves a little bit. And then we talked about how wide, long, windy the path can be to getting there, right? And learning to coach yourself is something that is very valuable. I will never say that it's not. I think that it's valuable for everyone in any situation. And if it's not working, please just try one more time to find something else that will help bridge that gap, help you get to the point where you feel like you can handle it on your own, right? And usually to get there, we need the help of other people, right? And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you where to go, but please go. Please go find someone to help you if you're in any of those situations, because getting to the other side is so worth it.
I want to say one last thing, and then I promise I'll wrap this part up. The only thing that I want to add to that, because that's beautiful, Maggie, like, please go. I just love that. Like, please go, wherever that means for you, whether that means deep down internally with yourself and sitting with it, or finding a specialist, or whatever that may mean. The only other thing I want to add is that the other side of it, because I could say I'm on the other side of it, right? I am in a much more manageable place with my mental disorder. And I am in no way, shape, and form a healed, perfect human that I've always been chasing. I can't tell you the amount of days that I'm like, am I qualified to help people? Am I? Who is letting me see people? I'm having my own show. Who is letting me do this, right? And all that means is that there's no perfect place I'm going to land at. I have dark days ahead. And knowing that reality helps me. It doesn't mean that I'm living in it. It doesn't mean that I'm like always preparing for it and waiting for the other shoe to drop like I was talking about. But it means I know that I'm not in this like free and clear place forever. There are seasons for everything in life, and I will have mine. And when I'm not in them, I don't need to be fucking preparing for them. They will come on their own. And that is how I'm going to make it full circle of my mall story, that bad things exist, dark times exist. And when they're not existing, let's not try and make them exist to keep ourselves out of the fear of that drop, which we can talk more about that drop if you know, you know. Let us know. I'm like a nursery rhyme this morning. I am very happy that we got to record this today, Maggie, and I feel very grateful to have shared a lot of these very intimate stories with all of you. And if you are in that season, if you're in that dark season right now, words won't really express how much love I'm sending you, and our DMs are open to helping in some ways. And I care about those of you who listen very much in this community that we're building. And I love you, Maggie. I liked our morning recording.
I did too. I do feel like we gained some energy as the recording went on.
We did.
So note to self, we might be back in the mornings. Who knows?
Until next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on another episode of You Can Trust Yourself with Meg and Maggie. Our mission is to leave you with encouragement and tools to nurture your ability to trust yourself. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe and please share it with a friend. Then take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and review. Your support helps our show grow, and for that, we are extremely grateful. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch the episodes. Till next week, lots of trust and love, Meg and Maggie.